What is going on, Secondhand Talent family? It's your boy Steiner here, as always, with another episode. And this week we are lucky to have my dear friend, Matt Croshier. Matt, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you. Happy to be here.
So this is Secondhand Talent, where we shine the spotlight on the people who shine the spotlights, the rest of the villagers in the village it takes to contribute to the live music scene as we know and love. And we're here in our 5th season. It gets harder and harder to ask this question, but I gotta ask it. Matt, you and I go way back. The first time I told you I had an idea for a podcast called Secondhand Talent, what was the first thing that went through your head?
I don't know. I don't know, man. It's been a while. I think I was supposed to be on this like a couple years ago, and it just never panned out. No, I think this is a really cool setup, though. I really like how you're talking to a lot of different artists and musicians and stuff, and just kind of picking our brain about the process. And meanwhile, you're making your own art.
Yeah, and part of this process is, I wish we would have had you on in season 1, but these things will happen when the time is right. And what better time than now? What better place than here?
Yeah.
Uh, it's a real pleasure to have you on the show. And for our viewers on YouTube, you'll notice this is the only episode in which I am not wearing a shirt designed by my dear friend Mark Spoosta. This is designed by my friend Matt Croshier right here.
The
Matt,
Argus.
and actually so is this hat, and so are all of the pins that are around it, except for, of course, Dr. Decibel here, limited quantities available on secondhandtalent.com. But Matt and I met through the fan art community, through the fish and dead scenes. And Matt just makes some of my favorite art of all time. And
Thank
we're
you.
here to talk about how and why he got into it and what drives him and keeps him going.
Yeah, that's a good question there.
Well,
Yeah, it's a
let's
roller coaster.
let's take it back to the roots, right? When you're still waiting in line for the roller coaster, if we're going to use that metaphor. And I want to ask this: what was kind of your musical upbringing? As you were coming up, we see the Billy Strings shirt, and I see
Yeah,
the posters in the back. But what were your kind of musical roots?
yeah, definitely. Let's see. If I were to say like, well, I mean, I grew up in a very like a family that was very into music and stuff. My grandpa was a drummer, and he also played clarinet in like a kind of like a street jazz band, and Um, they were really cool. They're from Cleveland. They're called the Musical Gigolos, and yeah, he made it to the Arthur Godfrey show, and I guess they lost to some little kid tap dancing or something. But who can vote against that, you know?
Ain't that the story of the industry, though?
Yeah, my mom was a musician, and then um, fast forward to my teenage years, my older cousin, he was really into fish, and he took me to my first fish shows when I was 17 at Deer Creek. I remember my mom woke me up, and it was like 8 in the morning, and it's summertime, and I'm like, what's going on? And she's like, your cousin Tony's on the phone. I'm like, oh God, what's going on here? And he's like, hey, I have an extra ticket if you want to see fish. And I actually like he'd given me CDs before that, and he gave me Billy Breathes, and at the time I was listening to a lot of metal, and I remember like putting on Billy Breathes and thinking like, what's this shit?
It's a heavy shift to the left, yeah.
Yeah, like it's very very mellow, and here I'm listening to mostly metal and like gangster rap and stuff. And I ended up going because I was a guitarist, and I still play guitar just for fun. And I was like blown away by it. I couldn't believe like the whole thing. Like he picked me up at like 10 a.m. and we went to Shakedown all day, and it was just super fun. Like so much fun, 17 years old buying Sammy Smiths on lot and stuff and thinking I was fooling somebody, but they just wanted my $5. But it was kind of a pivotal moment where I didn't know any of this really existed other than, every year when I was growing up, we know that the hippies were in town
Yeah,
when the Grateful Dead would come through for Deer Creek, because you go to Walmart and everybody would have shopping carts full of mixers, and
sure, sure.
the place reeked, Um, but no, it was really cool though. My cousin took me to my first show, and some of my friends from high school also went. So like during set break, I ran up to Lon. We had my cousin had like a really nice VIP box, and so it was really cool having kind of a closer experience for my first show. And then the next
Yeah.
day, a couple of my friends were like, "Hey, we're going back tonight." I'm like, "Why?" like, why? Like, not knowing that it was a different show every night. I'm like,
It's a
"Why?" You're
genuine knee slapper to that was a genuine knee slap, folks. Like, it's a genuine knee slapper to me now, but I totally understand. Yes.
yeah, yeah. Especially now, where I get the same question all the time, where people are like, "Why? How can you see the same band?" Like so many times. A couple months ago, I saw my 100th Billy String show. Since 2020 is my first shows were in 2020, and now I'm at like 110, 111, I think, and it's one of those things where I get that same question, and I'm like, well, it's different every night, and it's a hell of an experience, and even the shows that aren't the best are still worth seeing, and they're super fun, and the community is awesome. It's just like with Fish, it's like that with all Ween. Oh my God, like Ween has like one of the best communities ever. Like
Hail Boognish.
they're just like the most fun people. And, like there's never a dull moment.
Now you mentioned that you dabble you mentioned that you dabble in the guitar playing yourself. Now,
Yeah.
when did you start drawing?
Oh, I started drawing when I was, 5, 6 years old. Just as far back as I can remember. Every summer I would take art lessons with, I think her name was Miss Wolf. Um, we would do art lessons with her, and it would be like me, my brother, and like 3 or 4 other students at a time. And you just go to this woman's house, and she was our art teacher in elementary school. That's how we knew her, and that's how we got offered the program. And we just go there, and you'd spend like all day working on like one medium. Like one day it would just be all acrylic painting, and you might work on the same painting for a week or two, and then the whole thing though was throughout the course of the summer you would have to complete at least one of every different styles, like oil pastels, acrylic, colored pencils, graphite, just regular pencil drawings, ink and marker. And it was like the whole summer we'd be there 2 or 3 days a week. And I think when we moved, I was like taking all my art from my parents' house and moving it to their new house, and I had stuff from that summer class from like '92, so I'd be about 6 years old.
You start drawing at a real early age, and kind of one of those things, and I can relate, as far as cracking jokes. It's one of those things that I can't remember not doing. Be just
Yeah,
just being silly. And even though I'm oh so serious here on Secondhand Talent, coming off the heels at the time of this taping of my first stand-up show in 5 years, actually, and felt really good to get up back on that horse. But
oh yeah,
I gotta ask, when you were 17 and you experienced Fish, first of all, did you go back the next night?
yeah, we did. Yeah, I went back with my friends that time, and it was super fun. Like My first show was night two. It was a 3 night run. So my
Mm.
first show was night two, and then the second one was night three. And
So that's what I was gonna ask, because you had mentioned that you went, and I'm thinking Deer Creek, it's probably a weekend. So
oh
did
yeah,
you go all three? No, so nights 2 and 3 is the,
yeah, nights two and three, and
but that was
yeah,
enough.
yeah, it was ridiculously fun. And then the next year they came back, and so it was only 2 nights that year, and went to both of those. And next thing you know, they're like, and I didn't know it at the time, but they were breaking up,
Mm,
and
yeah,
uh, it's like one of those things where it kind of is like one of those things. There's the same thing that happened with Ween for me, actually, was that it
yeah,
feels like a rug
yeah.
pulled under you. My first Ween shows, you can see like the print behind me from, it was Broomfield, Halloween 2010, and then like a year later they announced that they were going on hiatus. They were breaking up, and I was like, oh, I'm just getting into this.
I resemble that remark. I really, I remember when I discovered fish for the first time and getting so mad when I found out that they weren't together and
Yeah.
I couldn't go see Fish. I was so mad that I became a Dave Matthews fan. Like I Dave
There's nothing wrong there.
no, Dave's great, but in all seriousness, like I remember hearing Fish and be like, "Oh my God, like I wanna experience this live," and it wasn't until 3 years after that that I was finally able to. And, with Ween, I got to see some of their performances, in the aughts, as they're called, at Lollapalooza, without really comprehending or understanding
Yeah.
who they were, or especially what was going on with the band at the time, and didn't get to see them from, like, 2006 or 7 all the way until 2016.
Yeah.
I wanna say, because they got back together in 2014. Justin Hampton, previous guest of the show, did the posters, for that, reunion tour, the famous, JFK Boognish poster.
Yeah.
Um, but I can absolutely, relate to that. Out of curiosity, after that first run of shows, or maybe after the second, did you begin to notice that, well, A, Did did you find yourself having a propensity to wanna go see more live music? And
Oh,
B,
yeah.
did you find that the music was impacting your artistic stylings?
Yeah, definitely. So I got like really into, okay, so after Fish broke up, the next like kind of like jam band related stuff, we saw in 2004, we saw The Dead at Deer Creek, and that was really cool. And then the next year, it was my first experience with like the what I would consider like the up and coming, like jam bands at the time, which was like Humphreys McGee. It was Big Summer Classic, so it was String Cheese,
Oh, yeah,
Humphreys
mhm.
McGee, Michael
Mo.
Franti, Keller Williams, and that was like one of those things where it's downtown Indy at White River before White River became like a real venue. This was like a pop up, um, which only a couple years ago is when all that happened. Like it was still just a pop up in the park basically, and um, I got really into all that, and then that New Year's in 2005, going into 2006. I was riding around with one of my friends in his car on New Year's Eve, and we were kind of having fun in Muncie, Indiana, Ball State University, and going to like keggers and stuff, and we'd taken some doses and stuff, and we're just shouldn't have been driving around, of course, but uh,
Allegedly,
yeah, yeah, somebody
allegedly,
else was somebody
yeah,
else was driving. Let's go ahead and cut
alle allegedly,
that.
allegedly.
Yeah. But yeah, my buddy was like, he's like, just pick out a CD. And I was like flipping through a book of CDs, and I saw the Disco Biscuits, and I was like, Disco Biscuits, what's this shit? And I like jokingly put it in, and it was yeah, it was Transfusion Radio broadcast number 3. Yeah, it started out with Memphis.
Yeah,
And I like put it in, I'm like, holy shit. I was like, this is fucking sick. And I
that
got
is
really
that
into the Biscuits.
that is my favorite Disco Biscuit song.
It's a fun one.
It is hands of all the Biscuit songs you could have named.
Yeah,
I absolutely love Memphis, Little Betty Boop, and Little Shimmy and a Conga Line.
yeah.
Those that's my top 3, no matter what anyone says, and I'll die on that hill. Um,
Yeah, so we like jumped in. I like jumped in face first with the Disco Biscuits and started following them around the country for the next 5 years.
shit, because I was gonna say, because that's pretty much like as they say in the industry, kind of a face plant into rock right there. And I, if you know, you know. And it's wild kind of to hear. It's wild to hear kind of how quickly that engine revved up.
Oh yeah, definitely. Oh, I think I accidentally turned off my headphones.
So getting to part B, how did face planting into rock, as we put it, affect your artistic stylings, or when did you begin to notice that all of this music that you were seeing live and discovering on CDs and friends' cars and all that stuff, like when did you start to notice that began to impact your artistic stylings?
It was right around that time that I switched my major and kind of maybe against my better judgment went into the I started doing digital art, and I started doing art as my major in college. My studio art mostly, and um, it was one of those things where I was kind of trying to figure out my path in life at the time, and I started seeing a lot more live music, seeing the Disco Biscuits a lot, and seeing Humphreys a lot. And I started like when we'd have projects and stuff. My teachers, my like professors, I guess for a better word for them, would they were like really supportive and into it. They thought what I was doing was like really cool, and I feel like they gave me a little bit of extra like artistic freedom with the projects. And a lot of times I would use like the projects and stuff as like a way to like meld the two. And
Mm,
so a lot of my projects when I was at IU, I went to Indiana University Bloomington, and they had a brand new program that was digital studio art. And so yeah, it was a lot of it was kind of like independent studies and stuff like that. And so I focused mostly on animation and interactive multimedia. Those were my main areas of focus. And so I would make projects that were like like for instance, I was working on animating the hot air balloon, the Disco Biscuits rock opera, by John Gottlewig. And so I was working on a animated short around that, and my professor, her name was Leslie. She was like really into it, and so I spent like the entire semester working on this, basically like a 5-6 minute long animation, all a flash animation, so that's kind of shows how long ago this was. And it
mm.
was a really cool project. I loved working on it, and that just kind of took my life in that direction. And um, I ended up graduating in 2010, and a couple of years before that, just shortly before that, is when like the economy kind of tanked, and uh, I graduated and I could not find work. at all in my field at all. Like I ended up doing moving out to Colorado, and I got a job doing search engine optimization out there for like 3 months, and I by the end of 3 months I just couldn't take it
I was
anymore. It
gonna say, like, that sounds like artistic hell. Like,
was it was definitely way too left brained and way too static for me. And at that point I was like, you know what, I kind of like I deactivated everything, Facebook, MySpace, all that stuff. Deactivated everything, and I was like, I'm not touching a computer for like as long as I can get away with this. And so I wasn't on social media at all. I wasn't doing anything artistic, and I ended up I moved out to California for a while, and worked on farms out there. And then when that kind of, the season kind of ended on that, I ended up back out in Colorado, and ended up getting a job at Costco for a short stint. And just trying to, like, I signed a lease in Colorado with like no savings or anything, and ended up, I was like, wow, like I really need to get a job. And so I ended up at Costco for like a year and a half, something like that. And I started like filling out like anytime I would be on Craigslist, like looking for jobs on Craigslist, and uh,
let's date ourselves more. Like MySpace, Craigslist, what have we left out? CDs, like
and so that's how I ended up as a prostitute. No,
it's
no,
the
I'm kidding. Basically, though, I got a job in a legitimate a hash oil extraction business out there, and it was like the second or third largest edibles and smokables company in Colorado at the time. So I did,
that'll spur the artistic process.
yeah, it was definitely an interesting one. So I worked there for a couple years and mostly did extractions, closed loop extractions. And that was cool. I ended up getting a job with them in the grow for a while too, and stuff like that. And after a couple years, like it just seemed just so stressful and stuff, keeping up with all the regulations and the politics of the industry and stuff like that. And um, so to loop it back to music, this actually does have, you know, this does loop back to this.
Bringing it around.
Yeah, it was 2015. The Disco Biscuits were playing at Red Rocks, and when I was living in Colorado, I never got to travel for music. I'd get to see my family maybe once every 18 months. Every 2 years, I'd get to go home and spend 3 days there for like my mom's birthday, and then come home. Stuff like that. And the Disco Biscuits were playing Red Rocks in 2015, and my roommate at the time, it was just like this kid that I met through other people that really liked the Disco Biscuits. Like he was actually like really good friends with Mark Brownstein. And so I still had like a ton of concentrate from working for this company. I just lost my job like a month before. I was like completely like strung out at the time and shit.
An
And
interesting severance package.
yeah, well, yeah, I mean, it's one way to make some money at least, while you're trying to find another job on Craigslist.
Allegedly.
Yeah. Uh, um, so like Mark Brownstein ended up coming over to my house and like hanging out with my roommate and stuff. And like I had known everybody in the band from years prior and stuff. And like I said, I was like pretty strung out at the time, and like Brownie and I like ended up having like a really long like heart to heart. And he was like basically told me, he's like, man, he's like, you need to get some help, like you need to do something with your life right now. And I ended up like going into rehab like a month later. I moved back to Indiana a couple months after that and stuff, and it like completely took my life in a different course. Just like having a conversation with them after they played like, you know it was an incredible run in Colorado. It's when they had Billy Kreutzmann and Mickey play a set with them. It was all Grateful Dead songs. Tom Hamilton was, singing some of those and stuff. It was an incredible show at Red Rocks that I got gifted a ticket to just hours before the show. I was like super bummed that I wasn't going to be able to see like one of my favorite bands at one of my favorite venues. And my friend's like, don't worry about it, man. I got your ticket. And ended up having an incredible, like, life changing weekend, and um, so, fast forward a couple months later, I'm like trying, I'm feeling like really good about my life. I'm sober for the first time in like a fucking like decade, and I'm like getting my life together. I end up getting a job doing hardscaping, like laying block for like fire pits and, you know, outdoor patios and stuff like that. And I had like a piece of machinery dropped on me one day, like just dropped on me. It knocks me out. I
Oh
have like severe
shit.
concussion, sprained my neck, all that
Damn.
stuff, man. Like really messed me up. So
Fuck
I'm like,
OSHA. More like oh shit.
yeah, fucking Craigslist jobs, man. That's how you
Every
know.
every time when I take a sip, never when you take a sip, man. People in glass houses shouldn't throw crack rocks.
Yeah, it was one of those things though, man, like that horrible company I worked for where I was ended up doing like physical therapy for like 6 months, because of this stupid ass like guy that didn't load up the machinery properly on the dump trailer,
God
and
damn.
the whole time they're like their insurance company's like threatening me and fighting me, being like, "You need to go back to work," and I'm like, what? So I'm like, I'm doing physical therapy like 3, 4 times a week and stuff. It's like really, it's awful. I'm like doing all this stuff. I got a messed up neck. I still do to like this day. I still have horrible like migraines and stuff like that. And so like the whole time I'm in physical therapy, like the company and their insurance company they're like threatening me, like you need to go back to work or we're gonna sue you, like this whole time. And so like I'm okay, like I guess I quit. I'm not gonna go back. And I had a really awesome physical therapist though. Like, I even before this, I for as long as I can remember, I've like struggled with depression and anxiety and stuff like that, like very severe depression. And she like was really in tune with all of this. And like one day when we were at my session, we were talking and I was like, she's like, what have you been up to like between our sessions? And I'm like, nothing. I like literally just sit and stare at the TV, I like don't do anything. And she started asking me like, what did you like to do before you got injured? What were your hobbies? Stuff like that. And I was like, oh, I like to play music, but I was also having like a hard time with like the coordination after the head injury with playing guitar. It was very frustrating. And we talked about making art and stuff. And she's like, well, why don't you? She's like, I'm going to give you some homework. Why don't you go home in the next couple days? Draw something or make something. And so I ended up like going home and I was like just sketching and drawing and stuff like that, and like I brought it in and she was like really like, oh wow, like this is incredible. And I remember thinking like, oh thanks, it felt really good to make something. And the whole like the whole time I was in, like recovering and stuff, I was also like collecting pins and stuff like that. Yeah, I like it was just like one of those weird coincidences. And the funny thing is, I never, during this whole time, I was like, oh, I could do this. It was more or less just I like really enjoyed the community. I really enjoyed the thrill of the hunt, looking for ISOs and stuff. And
Who were some of the artists that got you engaged when you started collecting pins?
well, that's kind of a long story there, is because I started collecting pins in 2009. At Hampton, I actually ran into it was actually Dave from Central Part of Town.
Oh, right on.
And I bought a couple Hampton UFOs as gifts, and it was like one of those things where like me and him were chatting, and I like really liked his pins, and they were like $10 each, and he was like, "I'll do three for 20." I was like, "Yeah, I'll take three of those, whatever." And ended up giving out the other two and keeping the third one for myself, and then I kept running into like the Mife guys over the next couple years.
Real quick shout out to the Mife guys who made the Dr. Decibel pins. Again, limited editions available at secondhandtalent.com, but also go check out mifedesigns.com and check out whatever limited inventory they have left in stock and get your hands on some amazing people.
Yeah, they got great stuff. And I also go way back with Jack Firestone, and of course, like he's one of my good friends still to this day. Got me my start with all this stuff, and I met Jack back in like 2007 or so on Bisco tour because of mutual friends, and so every time I'd run into them, I think he started making pins in 2009, and then I'd run into him all over the country with the biscuits, and I'd always, string cheese too. I'd buy whatever I could afford of theirs, and some of their fish pins. And so then flash forward, I have like a pretty nice collection going, and it's just like sitting in a box. And I come back to Indiana, like 5 years later, I come back to Indiana, and I'm like hanging out with some friends. It was before my accident though. Um, so I was hanging out with a couple friends, and they were actually like designing pins and selling them. And I was like, "Oh yeah," I was like, "I got a bunch of these," and they're like, "Oh yeah, man, like, what do you have?" And so I show them, and they're like blown away that I got all this like these old fish pins, old disco pins.
All the cream.
Yeah, all the cream, and so then they start telling me, they're like, "Oh yeah, there's like Facebook groups, there's like Facebook groups where people collect these and they pay crazy amounts of money for them." I'm like, "Really?" Like, I so I like get my Facebook back online and join some, you know, end up joining a couple pin groups. And next thing you know, I'm collecting pins again, and I loved it. I love, like one of the other artists was, Mark Serlo. Like he had incredible work. Like I just
Dear
blown
friend
away.
and a dear friend and a former guest of the show. Check out his interview in season 3. Mark, love you, buddy.
Yeah, I've met him a few times. He's a really nice dude, genuine guy, and incredible artist. And uh, yeah, it was just one of those weird things where 2015 happens, and I end up in a pretty bad state and stuff. And so I started drawing again, and I like decide I'm gonna reach out to Jack Firestone. I haven't talked to him in a couple years, but we knew each other back in the day, and I'm gonna see what he thinks of some of these drawings. I actually didn't even know if I should, if it would even be a pin. I was thinking, oh, maybe because back, 2009, 2010, I actually would make shirts and stuff, and none of them are impressive. It was kind of low quality stuff, not knowing anything about anything back then, and just having fun though, trying to pay for the next show kind of thing. And so I like reached out to him, and he's like, "Dude, these are pin designs." He's like, "These need to be pins." And so we end up collaborating and released my first pin in January of 2016. Just kind of hit the ground running on that, like at that point I was still basically like unemployable, like
Yeah.
physically and mentally just wasn't uh up to
What
up to par.
First of all, shout out Jack Firestone, Party Time Pins, Party Time Designs. Also, dear friend of mine, and we're looking forward to having him on the show as well. And folks, by the time you watch this, he might have been on the show already. We don't know. We can't tell
Yeah.
you. But Jack is a wonderful person. What was the first pin?
I was at Fairly Well Bertha with
Really?
the yeah,
That was your first pin?
yeah.
Dude, okay, so I need to interject here for a moment because where our paths crossed, right, was shortly after this. So I became aware of Jack's art a little bit. So Fish got back together in 2009.
Hmm.
I became aware of Jack's art, I think the following year. Was at Deer Creek every year, saw him on lot all the time. Um, Deer Creek, Alpine, and super, super fun dude. Like you mentioned, the Mife guys, folks like Caleb Williamson, just a bunch of amazing people out there
Yeah.
making art on the lot. And it's wild to me to think that I was heavily collecting before you and I met,
Oh yeah.
because I recall starting to see, having already been a fan of Jack's designs and having had some of his art. Like I remember when he started printing for the first time.
Oh yeah. Definitely.
Started cutting blocks. And I think that it was just before that when you and I had met. And I remember seeing some of your art and just thinking, wow, he really captures everything that the song is trying to say.
Ah,
Is
that,
how that's
yeah.
that's the feeling I get when I see your art. Like I think of your birdsong pin, I think of your Terrapin Station pin. I think of the sweatshirt I'm wearing right now, the Argus. When I hear the Argus at a show, when it comes on, when I'm listening to music, when I'm spinning the record, I think of this image.
Yeah, I
Like
appreciate that. Yeah.
this is the Argus to me, and
Yeah.
to the point where, folks, I hounded Matt for a couple of years because he didn't realize the kind of collector I'm trying to not be anymore. But at the time, I remember he posted a picture of this image printed onto a wood block, and I reached out to him and said, "Hey," and he's like, "No." And after a long while, I finally managed to convince him to part with it on the condition that if I part with it, it goes right back to him, which it's never leaving my hands, but if it goes to anyone, it'll go back to you. And I gotta ask, first of all, what was it like having such great reception to, because I know that Bertha pin. I know exactly what pin you're talking about. And it's wild that, I mean, and I think of my keeper board, my personal keeper board, like a significant percentage of the pins were designed by you or Jack. And and I gotta ask, what was it like getting that acclaim? Did you feel like it was rightly headed in your direction, or did you feel like maybe you were getting boosted up by Jack? Like, because I know what it's like to kind of come in either with assistance or sideways, or maybe not
Yeah.
directly.
Well, I mean, I have to give Jack a lot of credit for the production on that. Like, I think that if I would have just tried to go about it by myself, one, it would have never even happened. It's like, it's good to have somebody that knows their stuff, that's like, basically lighting the fire, being like, this needs to be done, like, let's get this done. Um, but the other part of it is the production. A lot goes into the production of anything, of a pin, of a hat, of a anything. Like there's so many different ways that you can take a project, and it can turn out so much different each way. And I see this all the time. And like, if we want to talk about pins, you see like you see a design, and sometimes you see it and you're like, wow, that was so well done. Like that is so much better than I could have imagined with the original artwork. Then there's other times where you see like the original artwork and then the final form, and you're like, damn, like that had so much potential. And I mean, it's the same thing. It's not, like I'm not pointing fingers at anybody else, putting them right back at myself.
Well,
Like there's times where my stuff could have been better. And then there's other times where it came out and I was like, damn, this is so much better than I expected.
When Mife reached out to us to help produce the Secondhand Talent Dr. Decibel pins, um, it was really a really intensive back and forth process because I knew at the end of the day, and again, I have to also give a massive shout out to Tanner and Mike and all those guys for their assistance with production and because I wouldn't have known where to start
Yeah.
without them. And at the end of the day, though, the buck stops with me. They're
Mhm.
gonna produce the design that I ultimately sign off on.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, when I see proofs, if I don't study it and analyze it and make the comments and we have that intensive back and forth, the final product, there's nobody to blame for the final product coming out wrong but me. I mean,
Yeah.
I could point fingers in every direction I'd care to, but I would be remiss to not point one at myself as well.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
it's definitely a huge leap of faith to put, you know, because our art is our baby. It's a huge leap of faith to put that in someone's hands and trust that they're going to treat it with the same, you know, care and love that you do.
Yeah, definitely. And it was a really great experience. I mean, I remember the pin drop and stuff, like doing that first drop and the anxiety and all that stuff, like hoping that the links worked,
Mhm.
all that stuff. And I was a relatively unknown person at that point, and um, I do the release and like they sold really, really well. They didn't sell out on release or even a couple days after, but it was just like one of those things where it's like, wow, like this is really incredible. Like I can't believe so many people like this to give me their hard-earned money for something, like and immediately it was like, like catching a bug and a few weeks later I took some of that money and I like parlayed it into the next pin and the release went horrible, where I like I didn't even come close to making my money back on it. It was like a marching bear pin and dancing bear, whatever.
It's the way it swings. I mean,
Yeah,
that's part of I mean, speaking strictly as a stand-up comedian, because that's really the best artistic standpoint that I can come from. Jokes do two things. They hit or they miss.
most definitely.
And you know what? When you're flipping a coin and there's 50-50 odds, one of the two is going to happen and you're going to experience both. And you
Yeah,
better be able to, if you're looking to pursue art in any form or fashion as a career, be ready for those highs and lows and it's amazing the first one did as well as it did because I mean, gosh, if I was about to make a terrible joke about my first open mic, but it's really important to have that initial success to be able to weather that follow up, kind of
yeah,
sophomore slump, let's call it.
yeah, definitely, definitely. And I remember like I at that time I drawn the original the Steely Rose that I do. I might like your on your hat and all that. I had drawn that, and I was like really in a place where I was like, is this worth making? Like I just like I just kind of lost my ass on this last project, and I don't have much money left over from the first project, and it's kind of like playing like a slot machine almost, where it's like, well, I hit a jackpot. I've got an extra $20. I put 10 of it back in the machine and lost it. I still got $10. What do I do? Do I go and buy a sandwich or do I let it ride? And I end up letting it ride, and it turned into the Steely Rose. And Man, like the response on that one was crazy. Like I remember like that one was overwhelming.
So I became aware of the Bertha pin. I remember the drop. I, and the rose I hit on that was the first one of your pins. I can't believe that was your third pin now in
Yeah, third
conversation
time.
with you. But what was the second one?
It was like this.
Just a dancing bear? Just like
Yeah,
a
it was. It's hard to explain. It was like I call them steely bears. I think it was like steal your face bears, where it was like the bear was pulling its face off, basically.
Oh, I know. Oh, I know what you're talking. I love those things. What the fuck, dude? Man, it's incredible what like it's so hard to predict crowds, man. Like that's
Yeah.
insane. Like
Well, now
but
it's like now it's like, or a couple years ago it became like very popular, and like people came out of the woodwork and were like, selling ones that
well,
I'd wholesaled so many of them and stuff like that, where I was like, if I could get like $3 each out of these, I'm happy.
that was when I started paying attention, and shortly thereafter, if I recall correctly, came things like the SpongeBob Wear Pants.
Yeah, that's
And
2017. Yeah.
yeah, uh-huh. Okay. Yeah, my timeline is somehow accurate. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Um, well, where along this line, we mentioned before, as of course it's worth mentioning, Party Time Designs. When did Croshier Designs become a thing? When did you decide that, like, okay, not only is this viable, but it's something that I wanna, put my name to and brand?
Oh man, that's a good question. I had some really close friends from the pin community that kind of like at the time it was right around when artists were making artist groups on Facebook, and those
Mhm.
were becoming more and more popular. And it was like a way that you could showcase just your art and have it like stand out a little bit more and get feedback.
Speaking of our friend Mark Thurlow, one of the first artist groups out, the Thurlow Studios group,
Yeah, yeah.
one of the very first.
I mean, I feel like his group kind of became a template when it came to like the rules, for making the artist groups on Facebook, where it was like the do's and don'ts.
Mhm,
And, you'd
mhm.
have like the lease auctions and stuff like that. If you remember those, where there were like trade auctions, but they had certain rules.
I remember. Trust me, I was riding the pin wave through the entire heyday. Like I
Yeah,
I was there along for the ride with you, just in a different car. But my brother, we were on the same highway. I can promise you that.
it's super fun, man. So much fun. That's the thing I miss most about all this stuff with the Facebook groups, like kind of getting swept under the rug almost, and stuff like that. Like I miss like just the fun of all the pin community and the art community. There's just so much like just the camaraderie, and
I
like
mean,
COVID hit and it was just like like it was already so strong, but then it just became so many people, so many more people, and it was just like incredible.
yeah, I mean, at a certain point, it becomes, I think the term is Steinmanned, or oversaturated, in the dictionary next with his
Yeah.
picture next to it. But it's really the type of thing where, and Mark and I talked about this when I interviewed him about pin production, and he kind of just didn't even really want to talk about it. He was like, "It's something I did, and it did really well, and that until it didn't."
Yeah.
And you know, that being said, kind of touching back to your point about that camaraderie, you know, thinking about specifically, in the years leading up to COVID in 2018, you created this pin,
Oh, the spiral.
the lateralist spiral, the tool
Yeah, yeah,
inspired pin.
spiral out.
And I remember I was living overseas at the time, and I said, "Hey, man, I don't have American funds right now. Would you please save me one of these pins? I'm going to see Tool in Amsterdam, and, like, I don't have any Tool pins, and I would just really love to have this." And not only did you save it for me, you engraved Amsterdam 2018 on the back.
Yeah,
And,
I
like, I remember I remember opening that up and seeing that and just being like, "Well, this is gonna be with me forever.
oh,
This
yeah.
this guy's awesome." Like, if I was in any sort of doubt, like, I mean, it's not just having pieces of your art, having prints, having hoodies, having hats, having pins, having blessedly a couple of sketches. The Demon Sweat sketch, which
Oh, yeah.
is my one of my favorite, just carte blanche drawings of all time. Um, it's so amazing to hear the story behind all of it, and to hear how so many assumptions that I had about how you got your footing, how you started out, what the reasoning kind of was. Like, I was, way off on so many things, not in a bad way. But I am just so pleasantly surprised to hear just how, like, special and unique this journey has been for you and how it's helped you in your recovery as well.
Yeah. It's really, it's one of those things where, sometimes, things come together the way they're supposed to, even though they don't come together easy, and it's just, I feel really lucky to still be making art. And, to touch back on what you were saying about, like, Serlo and the pins were just like a part of, kind of like a part of his lengthy career, he's been making art for decades, and
Forever.
yeah, and it's kind of the same thing where it's the same thing with what my mindset on it is that you're constantly just trying to evolve with um, the tools at hand, and like trying to enjoy making art, have fun making art, do something different. Just really, I have like that weird gene where it's like I get really wrapped up in all these different projects and stuff, and some of them take root, and other times it's like, well, that was fun to play around with, and now you move on to the next thing, like just recently, Firestone hooked me up with a bunch of like pieces of linoleum, and I have a cutter that was given to me a couple years ago and never did anything with, and I've been, yeah,
Ooh-wee.
well, we'll see if I can do anything with it. If not, then the thing that was really cool though was when he gave it to me, I brought it back and brought it to my house in Pennsylvania and started carving away at it. And even though I wasn't like blown away by the way it turned out, just doing little practice stuff. It was just one of those things where it had a really good like therapeutic quality to it, and it gave me something to like really focus on rather than the task paralysis that a lot of other projects like can contribute to. And so then you kind of find yourself in a rut because you're trying to foresee a whole project to the end versus just sitting down like when you were a kid and just drawing on a piece of paper doodling, and that's kind of what I was doing with the linoleum, where I just like was like, I don't really know what I'm doing here. There's a little bit of drawing on here, and I'm gonna just start carving away at it. And I don't know, I also bought a laser engraver recently, and that's another thing that I've been messing around with. And I was talking to another friend of mine recently about getting a sewing machine, and like by the end of this, I'll have like a whole warehouse full of tools that I don't know how to use.
All the equipment. I mean, but what I love to hear though is, and if anyone's been listening to the full interview, they've heard the range of bands that you've mentioned, you know, from Disco Biscuits to Billy Strings to Fish, dynamically different kinds of music all around.
And like Tool.
The the follow through though being it's all music with community, and
Yeah.
it is awesome to hear that not only are you, you know, growing with new communities as they arise in music, like the Billy Strings fan base, but also that you're growing as your artistic self and you're trying new avenues of art like laser engraving and like block cutting, dibs on all test prints. And you know, I think it's phenomenal to hear that, you know, you're continuing to explore those artistic avenues and finding uh, what you're seeking in those moments.
Yeah, I mean it's really incredible like the inspiration that each of these brings, you know, like when you're at a concert and or just sitting around listening to music or driving in your car listening to something. It's just really incredible when you start having like these thoughts and these visions and stuff like that. And you know, sometimes you picture something and then you start drawing it and it turns into something completely different. And sometimes I'll start something that I don't plan on finishing, and then it'll turn into something that's like with the rose, you know, like when I first started sketching that, it in my mind it looked completely different. And then after, you know, drawing the same thing 5 different ways, 10 different ways, then it's like, oh, okay, like this is how it's supposed to look. And it just kind of lines up. But you know, recently, last fall, Billy Strings put out a new album, and you know, it overplayed that, of course, and um, you know, it's really cool though having all these new thoughts and new ideas and stuff. Whereas, you know, a couple months before, it was kind of one of those things where it's like, well, everything's kind of drying up for me right now. You know, I feel like I've kind of had reached like the end of the inspiration from all the stuff that had already been written, and it just was, you know, it was one of those things where you go to enough shows that you start thinking like, all right, I need something a little different. So I start seeing a lot more of like the Kitchen Dwellers, you know, stuff like that. I love the Kitchen Dwellers.
Shout out Kitchen Dwellers! Oh my God, they're so I love those
Yeah,
guys.
Torn would be a great
Shout out
guest.
Torin. He's a great dude. Oh my
Yeah,
God, what a
he'd be a
wonderful
good guest
guy.
on here, man.
Hey
He's a
Torin, come on the show, dude. We'd love to have you, buddy.
yeah, you know. And then the new album comes out, and it's just like, oh, okay, like now there's all these new like synapses firing, and you know, like new art coming out and all that stuff, and it's just been great. It like kind of reignites the kindling of the fire, and it's just been incredible, you know. Like I'm, it's just kind of it's nice to see the evolution of all this, and it's crazy to go from seeing, you know, this band in small clubs and stuff like that to seeing them in huge arenas now. Really crazy.
Not to be cliche, but the way Fish put it, it's either a million little things to solve or not, and just let it all evolve. And
Yeah.
that's the way it's been, and it's been absolutely incredible watching it grow, and it's been absolutely incredible watching you grow with it.
Thank
Matt,
you.
we're just about out of time for this week, but before we go, where can folks find your art?
I've got a website, crocierdesigns.com. I also I put stuff on Etsy all the time too. I wasn't a big fan of Etsy for a long time, but it's kind of turned it's kind of, I don't know, grown on me a little bit. It's cool to get it out to different people, and um, yeah, it's cool. Like when I'm vending, people will come up and they'll be looking at my stuff and be like, "Oh, I bought this on Etsy," and I'm like, "Yeah, I have an Etsy shop."
Yeah.
So it's
I
cool.
shipped it to you. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that was me. Oh,
Yeah.
that's a funny thing there is I actually one time I got this just recently I got a email from somebody like, would you tell the shipping department to send this to my new address? And I'm like, I am the shipping department. What do you think? I have like a warehouse and like 10 employees or 100 employees running around like it's like a little mini Amazon. It's like, nah, man, I'm like, this is a one man show.
Just cold FaceTime Jack and be like, dude, you're my shipping department.
Yeah, I'll let them know. I'll let the shipping department know that we need to change your address, and hopefully they don't mess this up. But yeah, I got my website and it's all up to date, and I run it from the road too. I bring my label printer and all that stuff, so I'm on the road, and I'm trying to keep up with the inventory in person and online at all times, and it's great, and I also have Instagram, Facebook, all that stuff. It's all Crosier Designs.
It's all Croshier Designs. It's all Matt Croshier's art. It's all awesome, and we will have all of the links for you in the comments below. Matt, thank you so much for being a part of the show. I'm so glad we finally got to have this interview and get
Most
you on in
definitely.
season 5.
Hell yeah. I appreciate you having me, man. This is great. And, hopefully I didn't bore anybody on this one.
I've had to worry about 80 plus, who has some number, at least 76 episodes at this point of boring everybody. Are you kidding me? I've been riveted. This has been an excellent story to listen to. And folks, if you want to hear another excellent story to listen to, tune in next Wednesday at 4:20. This is Steiner from Secondhand Talent, and we'll see you next Wednesday.
Hey, thanks again.
And that's a podcast. There we go.
Oh yeah.
All
Real
right.
nice, man.
All right.
Yeah,
All
that was
right.
good.